to Extreme Reloading. In this episode, we're going to head out to the range and fire this load that I've been working up. Now, if you haven't been watching all the other episodes, shame on you. But let me give you a quick recap of what we're up to. This season, we're reloading for this old gun, and we're starting with the M48 Mauser chambered in 8mm Mauser. Now, we've spent quite a bit of time crafting the consistency of our cases, spending quite a bit of time on primer pockets and case uniformity, doing some sorting. And the load that we're going to be shooting today uses Hornady brass with a Federal gold medal primer, Varget powder, all topped off with a 170 grain Hornady SST bullet. Well, that gets us ready. Let's get going. All right, it's time to shoot this thing. I'm going to do this over the chronograph, working up those rounds. There's 9 rounds I need to fire. I'm going to be watching what we call optimal charge weight on this. So I've got my Ailer 33 out here to help out. Now here's how I like to do these sorts of things. I like to very carefully fire each round sequentially. And what I don't want to have happen is to have my box of ammunition fall over due to the recoil or something that I bump on the bench. So I'm putting, or I like to put, the box of ammo on another adjacent table. And that's also where my chronograph is. So after each shot, I'm ejecting that case, examining that case, taking mental note of the bolt lift, if there was any stickiness, and I'm not noticing anything at all. I wasn't anticipating that it would either. And then I'm looking at that primer, checking the velocity of that round on the chronograph, and then, of course, grabbing a second round or the next round and firing it. Now, one thing interesting that's happening here, I'm watching this, is that at round 4, I'm noticing that the primer is actually backing out a little bit. And that's becoming just a little bit more obvious as I go along. Now, a person might say, whoa, wait, stop the presses. That's a serious pressure problem. But it's not. Let me explain what's actually happening here, and it's so textbook. When you're firing very light loads like this, we can see primers look absolutely normal, and notice the cupping still exists on the edge. Look for that on the edge, the rounded edge of those primers. If you're seeing flattened primers and then they start backing out or piercing or something like that, then that is definitely a sign of high pressure. But we're not seeing that. But on these very light loads, the first couple can have perfectly looking primers, and then they start backing out just a little bit. If you keep increasing the pressure, they will tend to fall back in line and all that, like we're quite accustomed to. Now the problem, of course, is I don't want to push this old gun to very high pressures. So I'm still watching for that optimal charge weight. Now let's take a look at this target. Now this is interesting, and unfortunately I did not remember to bring my additional cameras. A lot of times I like to set up a remote camera very, very close to the target so I can watch bullet impacts. But in this case I didn't have that luxury, but I was only shooting at 50 yards and I could actually see some of those rounds impacting. And this target actually is showing us what we call a ladder effect. It's not a perfect ladder effect, but it certainly is a ladder effect. And that nice group that we're seeing is the rounds 4, 5, and 6. Those are actually very interesting rounds to me. We'll talk about that when we get back in from the range. That went pretty well. Let's spend a little bit of time recapping. And we're going to go through this, and I call it the good, the bad, and what's next. Well, we have two good things. Number one is the optimal charge weight, or the load workup, actually performed very, very nicely. We had very consistent increases in velocity, resulting in a very nice muzzle velocity curve. In fact, we have a very strong sill illustrated between 43.4 and 43.8 grains of Varget powder. The other good thing is the results on target. We didn't have a wild dispersion of rounds around the target, which indicates to me that that bullet is stabilizing very nicely. The way that that Hornady SST bullet is seated in the case, its distance away from the lands, the jump, all seems to be working pretty darn well. I really like that we're actually getting a group, a nice 3-shot group established, and we're not even throwing the same powder charge at this point. So that's very encouraging. The bad is the concern with those primers starting to back out, which I have already talked about. So, even though we understand why those primers are backing out, and it's not due to excessive pressure, it's still not normal for primers to back out. So I just can't bring myself to keep loading these 8mm Mauser rounds when it's not quite right. Hey, it's certainly not extreme reloading. So we're going to get it right. And now, the next steps. So what I'm going to do is kind of going to go back to the drawing board, and I'm going to work up the load a second time. And maybe, hindsight is 20/20. Maybe what I should have done is kind of done the more traditional increments in powder charges of half grain. And that I've used quite a bit in the past, but more recently I've switched over to the 2/10 of a grain increments while I'm looking for that sill. We can still do that. It's just going to be done in 2 separate steps. And so I'm going to start a new workup, use half grain increments of Varget. Otherwise, everything will be exactly the same. We'll chronograph this stuff. And then when I have a nice safe load as far as pressures are concerned, and I no longer have those primers backing out, which is probably going to happen in just a little bit further than what we've already loaded, then I will do another step, another process of seeking the sill with the optimal charge weight and play with some of those or experiment with some of those loads using 2/10 of a grain increments. Now, this 8mm Mauser has a tremendous range of powder charges between minimum and maximum. It's 43.0 grains as minimum and a full 50 grains as maximum. You don't oftentimes see a 7 grain spread like we see here. I don't want to push it to 50 grains, but I think if we just keep going a little bit, we're going to find a nice kind of sweet spot load for this 8mm Mauser. That'll be safe. I'm sure we'll be able to find another sill as we're going along. And anyway, we'll see how that all goes. Hey, thanks for watching this episode of Extreme Reloading. And stay tuned. We've got some more stuff coming up. We'll revisit the workup, optimal charge weight, and then be ready to shoot for group. Thanks for watching.